Hello and welcome to this episode of the Golden Age of Cricket podcast. My name is Tom Ford. Throughout the long history of cricket, there are countless examples of brothers who have reached the pinnacle of the game's highest format. Australia in particular has produced its fair share. Charles and Alec Bannerman, the Chappell brothers, the War twins, to name only a few. During the Golden Age, one pair of brothers experienced both the highs and lows of all life and cricket had to offer. The triumphant and tragic stories of Harry and Albert Trott are definitely worth retelling, and my guest today will help us in this quest. Rick Smith is a former A-grade cricketer from Launceston, who since his playing days has been a cricket historian, writer and photographer. He is the author or co-author of more than 25 books and numerous articles on various aspects of cricket history, including Australian Test cricketers and Great Days in Test cricket. He has also written on various aspects of Tasmanian cricket and was co-author of the book Tigers Roar, celebrating the 150th anniversary of Cricket Tasmania. Rick's book from 2010, Blighted Lives, the story of Harry and Albert Trott, won the Australian Cricket Society's Literary Award, and as he proudly told me, he is the only Tasmanian to have won this award. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be with you.
Well, and it's great to chat to you. So let's talk about the Trott brothers and your excellent book. What impelled you to write a biography of Harry and Albert Trott? And was it always going to be a double biography?
No, it wasn't actually. Initially, I started with Harry, and I wanted to know how you go from captaining Australia to being in a mental institution within 12 months. So I wanted to know what happened to him. And then I realised that you couldn't talk about Harry without talking about Albert because their lives are intertwined, and Albert's life is just as depressing as Harry's.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting read. When we talk about the research that you undertook for this book, did it lead you down any particularly interesting paths? And were there any Trott family members that were able to assist you in your research?
I think I got very lucky, actually. I was trolling a website, a genealogical website, and I came across a lady who was asking about Harry Trott. And I made contact with her, and I found out that she was his great granddaughter. And she was fascinating about their life after, or the later part of Harry's life, and what happened to the family after he died. So that was a piece of luck. And yeah, a lot of research, a lot of websites, a lot of talking to people. One that viewers or listeners in Victoria might be familiar with is Stuart Trott, who was an AFL footballer with St Kilda for many years. He's a direct descendant of Harry's.
Well, let's cast our mind, or certainly let's ask you to cast your mind back to your book, and let's begin way back. So, what can you tell us about the Trott family history and the Trott brothers' ancestry, particularly how the family came to Australia?
Well, I assumed because I found a record of them arriving from Liverpool that they were English and that they had come from England. But that isn't actually the case, or it proved not to be the case. And they actually came from the West Indies. And that was a
Mm,
surprise for a start. And,
mm,
and initially they had sailed from Antigua to England and then from England to Australia. And Harry and Albert's father, Adolphus, his father, John, was a teacher. And he was a teacher in Antigua, but it seems like that the family actually came from Bermuda originally, and he had moved there as a teacher. And what was particularly fascinating was the fact that John Trott's wives, both of them, were manumitted slaves.
right.
So and they came to Australia with one of them, and she was listed on the arrival certificate as a mulatto, which is a combination of usually a white man and a black woman, and usually that black
Mm.
woman is a slave. So who would have thought that the captain of Australia
Yes.
um, was the grandson of a slave?
Yeah, and it was something which surprised me. I have to admit, reading about it, wasn't aware at all. And I'm sure many of my listeners listening now are probably have raised eyebrows learning this for the first time. Have they not read your book?
There is one other bizarre relative that you might like to know about. There's a guy
Yes.
called Nicholas Trott
Mm-hmm.
who ultimately became the governor of the Bahamas, and he was described by the governor of Barbados as a man of unfounded ambition and little principle. And he did deals with pirates. He smuggled goods. He ended up leaving an estate of about £50,000, which was enormous money in those days. So we've got piracy, slavery, an incredible family background, which I had no idea about. I thought I was going to get farm labourers from England or something, and then
Yes.
I end up with this.
It's like the making of a Hollywood film, to be honest, because as you say, often the backstory is quite straightforward, but this was anything but. Um, you mentioned the boy's father, Adolphus,
Yep.
already, so he was uh, more than likely the greatest influence on their early life, of course, but particularly in terms of cricket. And as you say in your book, and I'm going to quote you. Adolphus Trott loved cricket. He was a man besotted by the game, but like many who fall under its spell, he wasn't very good at it. So, what can you tell us about Harry and Albert Trott's childhood growing up in the Melbourne suburb of Collingwood?
Well, first, I think Collingwood's a working class suburb, um, and so you've got a lot of tradesmen, labourers, people like that living there. Adolphus obviously loved cricket, and there's lots of people in cricket who just adore the game but couldn't play it to save their lives, and he was probably one of them. They would have had a basic education at a local school, and then and sport obviously would have been part of their early childhood and growing up into that. They did have one tragedy. One son, William, drowned while swimming in the Yarra when he was 7.
Mm.
So they lost one. But he got them in. Adolphus got them involved in a club called the Capulets. Now you have to explain what the Capulets were. And originally, they were the Collingwood Plasterers Cricket Club,
Right.
and I don't know where the name Capulets come from. Someone must have read Romeo and Juliet or something. I
Yes.
didn't know if there was another club called the Montagues, but you never know.
Mm.
And they started to play there. Initially, it was Gustavus, Harry's elder brother, who began to play there. And then Harry joined, and some years later, because Albert's a bit younger, he played for them as well. So Harry was playing for them when he was about 12 or 13. And there is a team photo with Harry in the front of it. Also in the photo is the Australian Test cricketer Jack Hodges, who was their star player
Mm.
and a controversial character of some note. And also in the team was Jack Ryder's father,
Wow.
who
Wow.
also played
Mm.
for them. So yeah, they played in what was called at the time a junior competition. Now that doesn't mean the same as juniors today, because juniors today means young kids. But in terms of that time, it means a level below the senior clubs, which would have been, Collingwood, Melbourne, and those sorts of things.
Mm.
And they did quite well. I mean, Harry started probably as a bowler. He was probably more a bowler than a batsman, and he started with the ball, and then gradually developed into a batsman.
And Harry was, there are a few brothers or siblings. We're primarily talking about Harry and Albert, of course. Harry being the elder of the two, so his career with the Capulets obviously started first, and Albert followed suit. They both went through the Capulets, I'm assuming.
Yeah, by the time Albert got to the Capulets, Harry was playing for Australia.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So there is that age difference between them.
So Harry does seem to have this. almost meteoric rise through the ranks of cricket. By the 1885-86 cricket season, he's playing for the Victorian colonial side, and he's
Yep.
playing under the captaincy of Harry Boyle, which is a name I know many of my listeners would know, one of the pioneers of the early days of Test cricket. And then suddenly by the next season, Harry is opening the bowling alongside the great Fred Spofford in an Australian 11 side against a touring English side, which is quite remarkable, really, at such a young age. Was Harry's rise to this national side as straightforward as it seems, or were there hiccups along the way?
It doesn't seem that there were too many hiccups. Um, I guess that Australia were looking around for some good new young players. They'd had some pretty unsuccessful tours to England in 1884 and 1886. They hadn't done
Mm.
particularly well. The players that had won the Ashes, like Spofford and Murdoch and those guys, were getting older, and so they were casting around for some young players. And Harry's form for South Melbourne was pretty good, so he got a chance with Victoria, did okay, and he got picked on the 1888 side to go to England. And I think Australians have a tendency to take someone on an Ashes tour who's regarded as a player of promise. It's happened a lot in the past, and you could probably think of a number of players who've gone on the basis that we thought they might be good. Some are, and some are not. And Harry ended up on the 1888 tour, which was not a terribly successful tour, but he did okay. He scored over 1,000 runs. He took 43 wickets. He did quite well. The problem with that tour and also his next one was the fact that Australia's leading bowlers were Charlie Turner and Jack Ferris,
Mm.
and captains just seemed to bowl them eternally
Yes.
on the basis that they were the best bowlers, they were going to get all the wickets, and no one else really got much of a look in. So, when it came to the tests, Harry didn't take a wicket, and I think he only scored 37 runs, so he didn't do particularly well in the test, but he did okay outside that. Um, but, there were other bowlers on the tour who didn't get much of a go either. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it is one of the peculiarities of the Golden Age. Well, really, from any early period of cricket history, when you look at the scorecards, you wouldn't see it today because they all need to be rested and rotated. But when a couple of bowlers were on song, they would stay on. And sometimes scorecards are complete, and an innings has just been performed by two bowlers, for example, and they've each bowled something like 60 overs. It's unheard of today. Um,
And I think Charlie Turner took something like 290 odd wickets on the tour.
yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I think Ferris was about 170 or 180 or something like it. Just ridiculous numbers.
Yes. Yeah. And so this was the 1888 tour, which
Percy McDonald was the captain.
correct. What can you tell us about Percy McDonald in terms of possibly what Harry learnt from him? Is there anything we can muster?
Well, he was a history teacher or
Ah,
expert, and that was his background. He was pretty good batsman. On that tour, he was the best batsman. He faded out a bit later on, but in the early 1890s, he emerged playing for Queensland
hmm.
and did quite well. And unfortunately, died early from a heart attack. His captaincy probably wasn't that great. He just threw the ball to Turner and Ferris and let them do it. And so probably I think if Harry learned anything from him and also from the next tour, it was not to be over reliant on too few individuals.
Every ship will find a harbor, and our bark will find one too.
If you're enjoying this podcast, perhaps you'd like to support it by buying me, Tom Ford, a coffee. Every little donation helps with the production costs and also inspire me to keep going. You can support by donating as little as $5. Visit buymeacoffee.com/Golden Age of Cricket. Let's actually assess the type of cricketer that Harry Trott was. We've touched on it already, that he batted and he bowled. What can you tell us about his style of batting and bowling, and was he actually classed, certainly through modern eyes, what we would term an all-rounder?
I think you'd call him a sound player rather than a spectacular one. He wasn't an enormous hitter. Uh, he tended to place shots. He's very good on the drive. He's very good player square of the wicket, but he didn't have the thunderous power of his brother. And so it was more like working the ball, building an innings. That was his batting. His bowling was it was basically leg breaks and straight balls
Hmm.
because the googly hadn't been invented at that point. It seems he was quite accurate, but it seems he was quite slow through the air, not overly quick, but the accuracy helped. He bowled few bad balls, and I think that helped him a lot rather than the amount of vicious spin or anything else. He was accurate. He frustrated batters. They'd try and hit him out of the ground, charge down the pitch, and
Mm.
be stumped or caught in the outfield. He got W.G. Grace stumped
Mm.
with a ball like that. I think at the start of his career, I don't know if true all round is right because I don't think he would have got a game as purely as a bowler. He
Mm.
started out as a bowler who batted, and he ended up being a batsman who bowled, and
Right.
so he switched it around. So if you look at the kind of role, it's someone who could roll their arm over. What we're doing with Tasmania's Bo Webster, with Cameron Green, with Stephen Mark Waugh, they wouldn't get a game as a bowler, but
Yes.
but added to their batting, to have someone in the top six who can bowl a bit is very useful, and that's what I think Harry became.
It's a bit like a reverse Wilfred Rhodes, really. He starts as this great bowler, and then in a few years he ends up opening the batting, and then goes back again down to the bottom of the list. It's not as infrequent as we think in the golden age. I mean, there was a high proportion of what we would term as all rounders today. And I've mentioned this many times on the podcast. We often class the likes of Trumper and McCartney as batsmen, and they are some of the great batsmen of all time, but they also bowled and bowled quite a lot. But we don't
Yes,
talk
they
about their
did.
bowling.
Yeah, and Joe Darling said he would have bowled Trumper a lot more, but he was worried about his health.
Well, exactly. Prophetic, really.
Yeah, very.
Back to Harry Trott. He's again included on the tour to England, this time in 1890. This time it's under the captaincy of the great Billy Murdoch, who is actually, at this point in time, residing in England. He's moved over there, which is handy for him. Doesn't have to endure the 6-week trip on the ship. What can you tell us about the 1890 tour of England, particularly Harry's performances, and whether he actually learnt anything from Billy Murdoch's captaincy?
He probably learnt what not to do rather than what to do. And Billy, one of the problems with Billy is, as you say, he was living in England. He didn't really know the players. He hadn't seen a lot of them.
Mm.
He didn't know what they could do. He didn't know what they were capable of. And like his predecessor, he was besotted with Turner and Ferris, who he obviously had seen. And so Turner and Ferris bowled, and everyone else fielded. And
Mm.
in the first part of the tour, Harry hardly got a bowl. He hardly used him. Later on in the tour, he used him a little bit more. Hugh Trumbull was also on that tour, and he wasn't used properly at all. And we know the kind of
Mm.
bowler he developed into. So the other problem with Murdoch was that he never seemed to have a settled batting order. He
Mm.
would change. He would change the order at what was a whim. Charlie Turner, who was probably a number 7 or number 8 in terms of ability, he decided that he would be an opening batsman. So he sent him in first in Test matches.
Mm.
It'd be like us opening the batting with Pat Cummins or Mitchell Stark or someone like that.
Mm.
And it would be foolish. And so you had people batting all over the place. No one knew their role. Kenny Byrne, who's always worth a chat, Kenny got on the tour as the reserve wicketkeeper, having never kept wicket in his life. through an amazing set of circumstances that are too complicated to go into. But Kenny Boone was a good bat, and he played in the Test matches. He picked him in the Test matches and batted him at 10 and 11.
Right.
It's hardly making the best use of what you've got. So I think the lessons that Harry took from those captains would have been to try and get a settled order. And these days we talk about role playing and a player knowing their role in a team. And I think it would have been impossible under Murdoch to know what your role was, apart from
Yes.
Turner and Ferris, who bowled until they dropped. But, to have a role, to have a batting order, to have some sort of a plan, not just throw everything up in the air and see what happens.
Yeah, the 1890 tour is a really interesting tour because you start to see the changing of the guard, which you noted. I mean, you've got Billy Murdoch, who was part of the original, Test sides, and he's still going, but he doesn't really know the players because he's based in England. But you start to see the young players coming through, like Hugh Trumbull, and then over the next few seasons, some of those old players like Jack Blackham start to then retire, and that's when the fortunes really start to begin for Australia. Not always in terms of victory, but in terms of competitiveness, because the 1880s weren't the greatest Test series. They were often very one-sided. So, yeah, that 1890 tour is a really interesting one to dissect.
Yeah, once they lost Spofforth from after winning the Ashes, and when Spofforth stopped playing in the mid 1880s, I think the attack lacked its sting. Turner and
Mm.
Ferris did it, but there weren't any batsmen. They weren't the equivalent batsmen. But then you get guys like Alec Bannerman starts to be more important. Jack Lyons becomes a good player, and then you get other
Yes.
players like Harry Graham and Callahan, and then ultimately to Clem Hill, Joe Darling, and people like that. And Australia gets back to the top towards the end of the 1890s.
Yes, and then there's I suppose, on the back of what we've just discussed, you get the consistency of Joe Darling's captaincy because he leads, 3 tours to England, thoroughly knows the players inside out, which is the opposite of what we've just been discussing with the
Absolutely, yeah.
first 2 tours that Harry went on. So Rick, after that 1890 tour, obviously he comes back and he plays domestic cricket, colonial cricket for a number of seasons. And in the 1892-93 season, there are 2 milestones in, I suppose you could say, the Trott story. The first is that Harry captains Victoria for the first time, and the other is that Albert Trott, his younger brother, makes his debut for the Victorian side. And I believe they weren't exactly in the same match, but they happened in the same season. So is it possible to work out whether Harry was responsible or at least involved in granting Albert his debut for Victoria?
You'd have to think he was involved in some way. I mean, Harry gets the captaincy because by 1892-93, he's a very experienced cricketer. He's done 2 tours of England. He's played a number of Test matches, and he's been around. He knows what's what, and so I think it's quite right that he became captain. I couldn't see anyone else in the team who deserved it more or ahead of him.
Mm,
And then, and I guess when you look at the younger brother of a Test player, you'd be silly not to have a look at him, wouldn't you?
mm.
And Albert had actually been going okay with firstly the Capulets, and then he moved to South Melbourne, and had been doing quite well there. So to put him in and give him a chance was not a bad thing. I mean, you think about the younger brothers of star players, you know, Austin War, for instance, and
Yeah.
I mean, you look at them whether they make it or not. Um, you have to look at them, and also the sons of players too.
Mm.
It is just a sensible thing to have a look. Some of the magic might be there. You never know.
I suppose in modern terms, everything seems to go through the system, as in whether you're the relation of a star player, you still have to prove your worth. But back in the golden age and the the early days, there were quite a few controversies of brothers of players being involved in tours or perhaps getting a spot in the colonial side when it wasn't warranted. And you can see it all through the newspapers. George Giffin's brother,
Well,
Walter, of course.
The Gifford thing is legendary because
Yes.
he had opted out of the two previous tours of England, and they wanted to get him to go because he was the best all rounder in Australia, even though he was arguably the most difficult cricketer in Australia, and they wanted to get him to go. And his only condition to go in 1893 was if his brother Walter went as well.
Mm.
And so Walter Giffin gets an Ashes tour, and he's probably barely worth a game for South Australia.
Mm.
And did very little for South Australia. Was a decent grade player, but he gets a tour because if he doesn't go, then George doesn't go, and they wanted George.
It's quite remarkable, and it's not something you would see today. I mean, imagine.
It definitely isn't.
Yes, the brother of one of Australia's Test players going on tour just because they want the other one to go. I mean, it's quite unique, but and it's not the only example from this period. We could name a few, but we
Yeah,
won't.
you have to remember too that these tours at this time were private enterprise tours,
Yes,
organised by the players as a sort of limited company where they would put in an amount for expenses and then they would split the profits at the end of it. So this is not something that's at this time that's really coordinated um, by a central organisation like Cricket Australia. There was the Australasian Cricket Council, but as one writer said, it was like a toothless cat, but not quite as vicious. It just had no influence, and the players just ignored them.
and the modern phrase would be boys club, and certainly in those early days you get this sense that they're all just good mates and that they want to go on an adventure together and help each other out, and it's during the 1890s that there begins to be some order, and obviously with the formation of the board eventually at the turn of the century, then all sorts of issues happen which we've spoken about on this podcast before.
40 feet across the chest, he's a guy that just the one strong and great. With the one that punches quicker the ship. Oh, take a hold on it to whip. Well, you, my brother, till death.
Rick, something else we've talked about a lot on this podcast, it seems to be a common denominator, is the great Test series of 1894-95. Many pundits think it is the start of the Golden Age, the so-called Golden Age. And it is also important in the Trott family story because it's where Albert makes his entry into the Test arena for the first time. He doesn't play in the famous first Test in Sydney, but he makes his debut in Adelaide, which is the third Test,
Yep.
and it to this day is still noted as one of the great Test debuts. What can you tell us about Albert Trott's debut?
Well, his debut is quite spectacular, but with Australia at this point, we're 2-0 down in the series. So I guess they were looking for a spark, something might liven them up and get them going. And it seemed like Albert was the man given the job. He was, it was an amazing debut. He started by making 38 not out and adding 81 for the last wicket with Sid Callaway. He didn't get a bowl in the first innings because Giffen and Callaway bowled unchanged. And this is the thing, Giffen is the captain at this stage, and Giffen always thought that Australia's best option was to bowl Giffen.
Yes.
And there is that story about when someone had the nerve to suggest a bowling change, he said he'd go on from the other end, which might be apocryphal, but actually, if you look at Giffen's career, it's the sort of thing that you might expect him to say. In the second innings, he got 72 not out in 90 minutes, and that enabled them to set England 526 to win. And then he bowled 27 overs straight and took 8 for 43 and won the game by 382 runs. So if you think about that, that is an extraordinary debut.
And I think to this day, I know one of my listeners will correct me, but it is still the greatest Test match bowling figures in an innings at the Adelaide Oval. I think those 8 wickets. I mean, there have been more wickets taken by an individual bowler throughout the entire match.
Yep.
I think someone once took like 14 wickets. But those eight for 43, I think you said, I think is still the best single figures.
In an innings, it probably is. I mean, Bob Massey, I think he got 8 for 50 odd and 8 for 80 in his
Yes.
debut.
Mm,
So I don't know of anyone that went underneath 8 for 43 in
mm,
a on Test debut. You know, people have got 5 wickets and things like that, but nothing
yes.
at all like that. And Harry's comment was at the end of it, who'd have thought the kid could do it?
Yeah, but those figures are legendary, and still, I love seeing graphs come up. Yeah, on TV today, and you see a Trott still at the top of the table. It's quite remarkable. Like we did with Harry, Rick, let's just pause for a moment and assess the type of cricketer that Albert was. So he's clearly got skills in both areas as a batsman and a bowler. How is he different to his older brother Harry?
Well, they're completely different characters, actually. Albert is a lot more aggressive in terms of the way he played cricket.
Mm,
His batting was always aggressive. His desire was to hit the ball as hard and as far as he could, and there was less science to his play than there was to Harry's. So you've got a very aggressive player, but it is very hit and miss. Yeah, some days it worked, some days it didn't. His bowling, it's hard to actually categorise it because they'll say, sites will say, oh, he was medium fast, but he was quite capable of bowling a very quick ball if he wanted to. And so
mm,
he varied his pace a lot, but he could also swing and seam and cut the ball. So he had all these variations. The problem was that as he got older, he he tried too many of them all at once. It was like an over of licorice all sorts, and it rather than work on a plan, he just run up and bowl something, and then bowl something different the next ball, and you get an over of 6 different deliveries. It wasn't a player who tried to work a batsman out. He just ran up and bowled whatever he felt he'd bowl at the time. Um, so I guess he would have lacked the tactical skills that Harry possessed in
mm,
working out a player. There are photos of his bowling action. George Beldham in Great Bowlers
mhm.
and Fieldsmen. Um, he photographed Harry in 1905, and even though he's starting to get past his best, what you see is a very low action, a low body action, almost a round arm swerve. He doesn't stand up tall and bring the ball over the top. It's more a crouched delivery stride. So he's a little bit hard to categorise as a bowler, but for a few years he was stunningly effective.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned those Beldham photographs. I think there's a great one of him fielding as well, taking a one-handed catch possibly, or attempting to take a one-handed catch. So he
Yeah,
must have been
had very
very
large.
large hands, yeah.
Yeah,
And you can see it, I think, again, one of those photos, he's holding the ball, not actually in action, not bowling, but just standing there holding the ball, posing like they often did. And you can just see his large paw gripping the ball,
yeah.
like he possessed some very large hands.
Yeah, and strong fingers, which would allow him to cut the ball, and um, yeah, and the variation of pace. If you look at him, he's strong, and he
Mm.
would have been able to put varying degrees of shoulder into the ball, and he would, as we say in modern parlance, hit the bat hard or comes onto you quicker than you think.
Yes, and if we think of the two brothers and compare them, there was a bit of an age difference. Harry was, quite a few years his senior, but also different body types as well. Harry always comes across as quite almost a rotund sort of style or a sort of body figure, whereas Albert was quite lean. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say Albert got less lean as he went on. As he put on weight towards the end of his career. But yeah, they are completely different types. If you look at photos of them, they're very different, and it's different body shapes, different personalities, really different people.